Hello, Sean here, Mountains Garage, on a somewhat warm Tuesday afternoon. Since last weekend, where I had the internals of this race TH400 that I'm building for myself, I had them stacked right up here on the bench, and we talked about each individual piece. And I had made the decision to go ahead and put them in one of the heavy-duty, in this case, Pontiac case that I have a bunch of them pointing over there. You can't see them, but there's a bunch of dirty cases stacked up that I buy from a gentleman in the Midwest, and he cuts the bell housing off and ships them to me. And I finished trimming them and fitting the bell housing, which I did on Monday morning. And the case that I chose, it's a 1967 Pontiac PB code. PB seems to be full-size car with a 400 two-barrel. Nothing exciting, but the case itself is as nice, it was as nice and clean as that ATI bell housing sitting on the bench here that was built in 5/23. That's the SFI tag on it. So it's the nicest one I had. It didn't even require me firing up the hot tank. I did all my modifications to it, same ones I always do, tapping for the vent, taking my sharpening stone and making sure the valve body area is flat. General checking every threaded hole. They're all perfect. This is the nicest case I've ever had, period. I'm glad I get to keep it for myself, hopefully, unless on a whim, on a weak moment, or somebody's in need, I sell it to them. I plan on keeping it. But as we all know, if you've been following along for 3 or 4 years, sometimes plans change in a hurry. So I painted the case. Stainless steel is Rust-Oleum, the old King can. But stainless steel is a beautiful color. I hope you can see it on camera, but I don't know why I don't paint them all that color. Sometimes other silvers are too silvery. It looks like you tried to spray on fake chrome. This just looks classy. That's a good way to put it. So I painted it all up, and yesterday I did not film the installation of the internals up until this point because for the first time I was able to talk to my son Marcus, who you met the other day, and he and I put it together, so I wanted to focus on just all you can do in that situation where you're starting from scratch. I mean, he has very little knowledge, is just talk about everything and hope that some of it sticks. So in 2 hours we had it up to the pump, and that's where we stopped. That was enough for him. And we talked about everything under the sun, but mostly he was really focused, and I was pretty impressed, actually, because sometimes you never know. I can't, I'd love for him to be excited to be out here working, but he has to make that choice himself. So over time, at least I will try to impart some knowledge so he'll at least be able to function in society on his own long after I'm gone and have some knowledge and not be taken advantage of. The more you know, the more you know. So I got up to the pump today, and if you were paying attention last weekend when I had everything stacked up here, the pump that I had chosen and had sitting in the stack is only a 6-bolt pump because I really wanted to put this in an SFI case, but I could not justify spending $2,000 and having it sit around in the 5 years it's going to take me to finish the car probably, and then I'll have to strip it and have the case recertified. I'd rather pull it out of this and put it in an SFI case if I ever get to that point of being caught up and needing to do so. Same thing I said last weekend. So while this pump was clean and ready to go, as I told you before, I did not tighten the bolts and center it with the radiator hose clamp because I like to put just the back half, the stator tube half, into the case just the way it is with a gasket and some alignment dowels and check my end play. It's a lot easier than wrestling the whole pump in and out. I did it with the sealing rings and the first selective washer that I chose, and it's in the range of perfection, so I'm going to leave it there. Then I had to convert it. I had to drill the front half of the pump for the 2 missing bolt holes because in the SFI case I didn't finish my point. I typically just, if I have a 6-bolt pump, I only put the pump in with 6 bolts. It's not going to jump out of the case The only reason I want 8 is to use all the holes in the housing. Now, let's sidebar before I talk about the pump again. Let's talk about the ATI housing. I've done comparison videos before. The reason I like it, and I'll even talk about the reasons why I don't like some of it, they give you 8 flange bolts, not bolts with washers. It's an actual flange bolt. They give you regular, genuine, stock replacement Turbo 400 pump washers for the bolts and a gasket to go between the bell housing and the front side of the pump. So there's no O-rings, there's no silicone or RTV sealer needed. You can literally put your pump in like normal on top of the dry gasket, lube your O-ring, put the pump in. I usually use a couple of regular bolts to make sure it's all the way down, or tap it down, whatever you got to do to make sure the pump's all the way down. I leave my studs right in there. I go ahead and I put the gasket on the case, set the bell housing on, put the washers on the bolts, and set it up. ATI gives you, if you have a 6-bolt case, they tell you it's perfectly acceptable to run it with 6 bolts. They actually thread the other bolt holes right there, and they give you plugs to put in from the front side. But just to keep stuff from accumulating, those are threaded. Nobody else does that. Nobody else gives you flange bolts. Nobody else gives you a gasket. And from a price perspective of the big 3, ATI, BTE, and JW, and that's the order I like them. The BTE is a fine piece, like I've mentioned, because it, instead of being a direct fit on the pump, they give you an adapter, and the actual bell housing itself fits the reed case. So if you got to upgrade someday, you just take the adapter off. So credit to BTE on that one. And as I'm repeating everything I've said in the past, but the one downside, if you're a gapologist and the gap between the case and the bell housing is really important to you, you're not going to be satisfied with the ATI. It is so small. I cut this perfectly straight. I've gone over that 50 times. I don't know why I tell you I've gone over it. I'm going to go over it right now. The 3 raised areas on the pump, I cut completely flat out from there, and then I curve up to my pan. You got to trim the pan rail a little bit too, so it clears the case. I've done it enough that I can usually nail it first try. I dummy it all up with a pump and some studs, set the bell housing on there, make sure everything's honeymoon. And it was. This is so much smaller, the case stops back here. So if you really want your tight gap, you better go with a JW, because the BTE with the adapter and the ATI, the way the bell's made, you're a long ways from this gap you just cut. So all you can do here is just cut it straight so it's visually appealing to the eye, and don't worry about the rest. And before the video's over, I will have this installed and show that to you. So my pump, getting back to that, was all built. I got the new bushing in it, 1-piece bushing, new seal, it's painted, it's ready to go, and now I got to drill holes in it. So how are you going to do that without wrecking it? If I even set it in the drill press, I'm going to at minimum scratch my paint, and the drill press tends to throw a lot of debris. It's cast, so it drills really easy. So what I do, I set it up like this, tighten the bolts loosely. Does that make any sense? Tighten them loosely. I go ahead and put all the bolts in the holes, or the 6 holes at this point, because I've had to drill 2 more. Tighten the hose clamp, so now the pump is technically ready to install, even though we need to drill 2 holes in it. I take a transfer punch that fits so tight I actually have to tap it into the hole that's already here, because these are larger than 5/16. These bolts are 5/16. So they give you a little bit of, come and go, but you still want to be accurate. So if I chose one size down on the transfer punch, it could wiggle. I don't want that. So I choose the one that actually just pops into the hole. You got to pull it back out with a pair of pliers. It's not hard, but it is absolutely straight and accurate. Just tap down, make a point. And for today, if I hadn't painted the pump yet, I would just go ahead and use a drill press, or I could use a mill or something like that. But today I actually hand drilled it with my M18 Milwaukee. Right here on the bench, I stuffed rags in my bushing and seal on both sides so they were sealed off. Put a rag over the whole pump and just drilled a little bit, kept wiping off the chips. And I drilled it over a trash can. And it drills so easy, and it's really easy to do, that everything is now perfectly straight. I got my 2 holes, I chamfered the other side, didn't even hurt my paint. Washed the front of the pump again to make sure there's absolutely nothing in there. Blew it out, and now we're back to assemble it for real. Why do I got all the bolts down through it? Well, when you loosely put in the 5 bolts to hold the pump halves together and put your hose clamp on, again, everything's still loose, you could actually, if you take the bolt and move it side to side, you can wiggle. There's a little bit of movement. And if you're cocked all the way one way and the shoulder of these bolts start hanging up, they're really tight through here. You combine those two and you're gonna have some trouble putting it on. So I make sure everything is nice and relaxed. Then I tighten the hose clamp, tighten the bolts. So that's done, ready to go. So all I need to do now is put it in the transmission. The case itself, I use the Sonex no-walk bushing. I originally bought one kit when I did my first transmission, because I have 2 transmissions from my 55 that is years away from being completed. Also have 2 center sections and several engines. And nobody ever said this has to make any sense. I just go as I go. I had enough shims left over, and it comes with a GM bearing. It's not the typical bearing we put in the bottom of the case when we're just replacing the stock thrust washer and selective washer. It's a larger bearing to fit over the no-walk bushing that drives in from the inside. This is the Kentmore tool and handle as it comes, and I made an extension for it. I use this with other drivers, but in this case I can put them together because you have to go down through the case and drive it from the inside. So that actually works really good. There's a video in my playlist where I bought the Kentmore driver set off eBay, and for the most part they're really nice to have for, again, at the time I bought it you could make an offer and the offer was typically accepted. I know some people that offered less than I did and got a bushing driver set. So I love tools, and again it really comes in handy. So I put the no-walk bushing in the case and put the bearing in, guessed they give you a bunch of shims. I guessed at 15 thousandths and my rear end plate came out nice. And the rest I just slapped together. Hang on. I'm just gonna keep talking, I guess. Doesn't want to shut off. If you remember from Saturday's video, I questioned how the intermediate clutch pack was gonna fit. The one ATI gave me in a kit. I bought their aluminum drum, 36 element. Comes with a center support. It comes with an intermediate clutch pack. 4L80E dimension, but they gave me a 400 stock dimension pressure plate. Now I could have machined this ridge off right here, but I have in stock the 4L80E plates, which is what I end up using. But before that, the fretting ring, I told you 8 thousandths smaller, so I assembled it with a stock one. Everything fit fine. I don't want to set the center support down 8 thousandths more than I have to. That was my end plate clearance. So not only would the bolt might have given me issues lining up, so this was also in the ATI kit, and I did not use that. You probably could, maybe. I was happier knowing I have the stock dimension fretting ring in there, and everything works just fine. This is 107 thousandths intermediate snap ring that came in the ATI kit. I did not use that. I used one of my 95 thousandths ones because I needed the clearance for it to work out properly with the clutches and steels I was given, which are 4L80E dimension. But so if I had just the kit and I didn't have a bevy of other parts kicking around, I would have been in trouble trying to assemble it, and I would have had to stop. Again, I could have machined on a lathe that pressure plate down to fit. You know, it needed about 40 or 50 thousandths taken off it, and I have more snap rings, so it's just handy to have extra parts. It's taken me a long time to get to this point, so don't dismay if you have, be wrought with dismay if you don't have a lot of extra parts. Just be aware that You might not finish it in one day correctly, because if it's wrong, you got to stop and get more parts. All right, the good guys won. It was a pleasure to install, because if for any reason you had to take it back off, worst case scenario, you might need a new gasket and new pump washers, but you don't have to spend a half an hour picking RTV out of the threads. It's been forced down into the case. It's just a mess that I don't miss. So you do want to, when you're outside or wherever you're grinding the case, to make sure everything fits. Again, I put studs in. I put a dummy pump with no gasket. My thinking is, as I add the gasket, I'm getting further away from the case, so I'm definitely going to clear. But you want to go around with your flashlight and make sure, especially around this area, shining both sides. You don't want it touching, because if it touches, it's going to fail. So it's going to leak, if not break the case. Catastrophic results. So it's really important to take enough material out of the case to make sure that happens. And this is the gaff I'm talking about. This is my case. This is my housing up here. There's no amount of material you could leave on the stock case that's ever going to mate up to this. It's cosmetic at that point. It's not structural. Just let it go. And you can actually see the connection where the bell housing joins the pump. You know it's 100%. It's actually a better thing. Again, I have never been stuck on this whole gap thing, but some people think they've lost the war if they don't have an airtight gap on there. I want to be able to make sure it's not hitting. So to finish this transmission, I any day now should be receiving a shipment of valve bodies from Automatic Transmission Design. I'm going to take one of the 1+2 leave, first or second gear leave. I hesitate to call it a 2-speed valve body, because they actually make 2-speed Turbo 400s that are only 2 speeds. That would get confusing, so I call it a 1+2 or a first and second gear start. So the trans brake will work in either one. So if I had to leave in second gear for some reason, or you had, with the stock gear set at 148, I'd be curious to see. I hear some people can still leave in 60 foot pretty hard, leaving in second gear, especially on the, all the no prep stuff. But I probably won't be racing no prep, but never say never. And that may be all that's left by the time I finish the car. You never know. So I'm waiting on the valve body. I have everything else over there on the table in the background. I have a BTE aluminum pan. That's a brand new TCI shield that my buddy Ken found for me on a closeout. The SFI date doesn't even start expiring until next month, September. And I've had it for 3 or 4 months. This bell housing started expiring in May, whatever. I have on my other transmission, and this one, a BTE roller tail housing. Instead of a bushing, there's a roller. You have to have the hardened, maybe other people make them, but strange is what I have. Yoke, it's a different part number than what would go in a bushing housing. It's a few thousand smaller, and it's hardened to ride steel on steel. So I had the yoke first. I'm not against just running a bush and tail housing, but hey, if it's less drag or has other advantages, so be it. It's a lot more expensive than a bush and tail housing. So once again, if you have a bush and tail housing, don't think you need to go swap out everything just because. But I'm starting from scratch, so why not? I buy the BTE roller tail housing because it's $100 less than a Reed. And from a quality perspective, I can't really tell the difference. I like that it's solid. And it will take a 4L80E quad ring or a gasket. I have more gaskets than I do quad rings, so it's getting a gasket. A bevy of flange bolts, 3/8 grade 8 to hold it on. And that'll be that. So I can finish everything. I can even put the pan on it, and then that's why I chose to put it on my roll around rig. This is what I normally cut the cases outside with. But I actually moved the 4L80E behind me that I'm supposed to be converting to two-wheel drive any day now. Because I thought I was going to build this there, then I realized, hey, wait, dummy, you're waiting for parts. So don't put it in the way and then have to move it. This is really slick, and my yellow Jegs elevating table that you see me using goes right between the legs. That's why I chose this style of engine stand. And I can go right in under the pan, jack it up, or I can load them in and out on this pretty easy. So that much I like. So that's today, and I'll catch you in a couple days. I hope you're having a great day. Thanks for following along, and I'll catch you next time.